Ukraine's campaign to shape the battlefield on the Crimean Peninsula is continuing with attacks on airfields, air defense, and this time the ground station for the Russian satellite program. In this context, the attack also hit and injured some civilians. We'll talk about this in the situation report, as well as about the attack inside of Russia and about how South Korea shows the Western world how red lines in regards to Russia are being drawn. We'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front line of the war in Ukraine in this situation report. And this guy, as some people asked last time, this guy's name is Etzel. I caught him in front of the house as a stray, and now he's a love bug who decides now and then to appear around the time I record. But let's start with the situation report. The Ukrainian strikes on the peninsula, the Crimean Peninsula, are continuing, and last time they hit the NIP-16 communication array. Those are a ground-based communication array with satellites, which, according to reports that I read, I have to say I have no clue about this, but according to reports that I read, they are being used to communicate with Russian satellites, among them spy satellites, reconnaissance satellites. As they are further to the west than other comparable devices, they allow Russia to extend the direct control of their satellites further to the west, and thus extending the range of reconnaissance where they can be used. And thus an attack on these arrays will reduce Russia's capability for reconnaissance. The attack itself led to a strike on the beach, or to injured and to casualties on the beach. The Russians say that 5 people died. Over 150 were injured. On Telegram, though, we have an interesting comment by the Russian Ministry of Defense before the extent of the casualties were known. Russia said it was a Ukrainian attack with ATACMS. They shot down 4 of the missiles. The 5th one was also hit straight off of course and then detonated over the city. So the Russians claim it was a Ukrainian ATACMS, but they at the same time say that Ukraine did not deliberately target civilians, as some propagandists by now are already saying. So even if we believe Russia's version, which by far doesn't have to be the truth, but even if we believe them, they clearly say it was not a Ukrainian intent to kill civilians in this strike. The air defense that is stationed there was supposedly also hit, and by now we have this picture popping up on a Russian, pro-Russian channel, which supposedly is made from that beach where the civilians were injured, and it shows debris, but this was identified as a missile for the Tor M2 system. Now, this is important because Tor M2 is a SHORAD system that is incapable of intercepting ballistic missiles. So if this was supposed to be an attack with ATACMS, then Tor M2 shouldn't have fired there. It makes no sense why it would be there. So either the Ministry of Defense said something wrong here, and it was in fact cruise missiles like Storm Shadow, Scalp, or maybe a Neptune, or it was drones, but it said like the story doesn't fit, it doesn't fit together. The number of casualties also seemed to be low, but if we listen in here, let me quickly turn on the sound. You can listen here a video from that beach. Now, no casualties are visible, but the characteristic sound, for me, that's undoubtedly cluster munitions. I've heard a lot of them in the past. Now, while we roughly have 15 detonations, and this shows us that it's not a full load, but that would fit to the Russian claim that one of the ATACMS has been hit and then broke off, because that doesn't necessarily mean that every submunition, every bomblet is deployed and every bomblet explodes. And a smaller number, some of it maybe detonating over the ocean, might lead to something like this. But the sequence of explosions, all at the same level, all of the same characteristics in acoustics wise, are, for me at least an 80% likelihood of it being cluster munitions that we hear here. Now, where it's coming from, we obviously have no clue, but we do know that more or less certain civilians have been hurt. and that the Ukrainians did an attack and that the Russians intercepted it, that the Russians claimed they intercepted it, and they said that they managed to defend against it. But one of the missiles that was hit straight off course and then exploded over the city. So even if this should have been, even if this was Ukrainian cluster munition that caused the injuries here, the Russians themselves said initially that it was not Ukrainian intent, which would turn this into a tragic event, tragic casualties here. But the difference is obviously they wouldn't be victims of a deliberate Ukrainian attack and thus not a war crime. There's also been an attack on Dagestan, well coordinated at several points, done by several, I read 5 or 6 attackers. Now the attack is clearly identifiable as T and then the word error behind that, but unfortunately YouTube doesn't like to be doesn't like the usage of certain names, so allow me to phrase it like this. And here, this attack in Dagestan, the interesting part is that 2 sons of the governor of the Sergo-Kalinsky district and his nephew were involved, so local elite, we could say. 15 policemen have died and at least 4 additional victims. The videos of the attackers showed well-trained professional fighters using clearly trying to keep an overview, securing each other's approach. So well-trained attackers here, not just some madmen that grabbed some guns. And in the context here, in the war in Ukraine, it's obvious that this is the second attack of this kind within this year. The second biggest attack, at least. And if the interior intelligence agencies, if your police forces are more looking towards to find Ukrainian spies and less to actually take out the potential attackers in this regard, then obviously it opens some windows of opportunity that seem to have been used a second time here as well. Now let's switch over to the developments along the front line here, and in the northern front from the west, I just have reports of additional Ukrainian attacks on Lyboke, but no results here. But from Vovchansk, we have visual evidence of the Ukrainians fighting here. So Ukrainian troops are up to here in Vovchansk. They have returned to this, and we have a geolocalization showing them here. The video itself shows them storming buildings. So we see the Ukrainians in attack in the eastern part of Vovchansk. Further south, or let's say further east, because that was it from the northern front. On the eastern frontier, we have news of Sinkivka, east of Sinkivka. The Russians managed to capture those 2 tree lines here, an advance of roughly 500 meters in each case. But that's the whole change of the eastern front north of the Siversky Donetsk. South of the Siversky Donetsk, the Russians managed to enter Rostolivka in the south, roughly here. We also have a geolocalization. It's also geolocated here and in Rostolivka, where they have entered here. According to the Ukrainians, they withdrew afterwards. I do not see proof of this, but it's confirmed that they managed to enter into and cross over the first road of Rostolivka. So the house-to-house fighting in Rostolivka has now definitely started. The Russians were also successful in Chasiv Yar itself, in the Canal district. Here in the northern part, they were spotted up here. And in the center, they were here. Recently, they have been seen here, raising a flag as well. Now we have them in the southern part, and as you could see here, in the northern part as well. So this area is now under Russian control as well. Further south, we have the advance of the Russians is continuing at Mayorsk, here in the area. Now they have reached the installations here of the canal. They have advanced up to here by now, and the Russians have also reached Pivnichne here and taken all the territory between Shumi and the canal. This is all under their control now. The town or the small city of Pivnichne should be the house-to-house fighting should be starting there as well now. Then further south at Avdiivka, we have proof that Novo Oleksandrivka was captured. This was The image shows the Russians in the south and in the northern part. Now there are some claims that the Ukrainians might still hold some parts in the northern area that we could see here. So here theoretically could still be some, but we see the pro-Ukrainian deep state map, for instance, showing all of it under Russian control already. The Russians themselves said that they already reached Vostvychenka. They say that they reached Vostvychenka, but as of now, there is no proof. The situation here is becoming critical, though, as Vostvychenka is the last town before this road. And this road connects the whole frontier from north to south, basically from Pokrovsk up to Konstantinivka, and then the connection up to Kramatorsk. As a line of communication, it is essential for the whole defense here. Should the Russians reach it, the situation in the overall area will get a lot more difficult. So the advance here is operation-wise, probably in operational terms, the most dangerous for the Ukrainians. That is where the development is currently happening. Then at Sokil, the Russians managed to extend their foothold inside. They control most of Sokil now and advanced somewhat in the west here and somewhere here in the east. So they solidify their control over Sokil and have fully taken the fortification that was up here. Further south at Novopokrovka, they also advanced here, and we have them advancing in the area. One moment. No, sorry, it was Novopokrovsk. Here, the Russians advanced somewhat further south. They managed to advance somewhere in the north in the direction of Sokil. Not much of a surprise here, obviously, that the Ukrainians are likely withdrawing from at least some of those tree lines here. And in the southeast, they also managed to advance further. From the Marinka area, we have something new, an additional Russian advance in Krasnohorivka. Here it is geolocated as well, and it shows us the Russians in this part before they have been here. So we see them slowly advancing from the bigger buildings towards the north and northwest here. It is more or less here, so this area should be under Russian influence or Russian control as of now. Further south, the Russians advanced close to Konstantinivka, here in the area of Vuleda. The Russians, Konstantinivka. Here the Russians took more or less this whole area, and they managed to advance on a width of 6 kilometers down and a depth of 2 kilometers in this area, advancing towards Vodiane and Vuhledar in this area. Further west, we have Russian reports that the Ukrainians do counterattacks on Staromayorsk and Uroshaine. I do not see that any success has happened here, and I do not even see Ukrainians claiming success, though, so those attacks must have been unsuccessful. Further west, and in the last days, a disturbing video has appeared from 3 Russian soldiers advancing. One of them is getting hit by an FPV drone, and then he's asking to be put out of his misery. This basically has to be said of this. He clearly indicates it to his comrade, who immediately follows up the request and then marches on, continues running. And this was located in this area here, right northeast of Robotine, roughly up here, showing us that Robotine should be under solid Russian control as of now. As I said, like weeks ago already, I still don't really understand, while the deep state map claims it's still a gray zone here, if the Russians are already operating further out of the town itself. Then we have interesting news from maybe partisans. There's a big fire, and it seems to be still going on in Russia at close to Moscow. And this is interesting because, according to reports, this factory is producing electronic components for fighter jets, nuclear munitions, and S-400 air defense systems, as well as for guided systems. And the fire is so extent that people have started jumping out of the windows because they couldn't get evacuated. So that whole building we see on fire here must be completely destroyed. There are further videos from that are more recent, where the flames are massive and the whole building is burning down. Obviously, there is no proof as of now that this was sabotage, that the Ukrainians did burn it down, but it seems to definitely be in their favor what has happened there if the reports about this factory are true. And finally, we have the South Koreans showing us how it is actually done. The National Security Advisor of South Korea said armed support for Ukraine depends on Russia. The South Koreans do not do the mistake of now sending whatever could theoretically be possible as themselves breaking down all barriers for Ukraine's aid this would take away every leverage that they still might have left in regards to Russia when it comes to aid for North Korea. What they are saying now, we will send weapons to Ukraine, but how much and what type will depend on the Russians, showing the Russians not drawing red lines for themselves as the West has done most of the war so far, where they insisted, no, we will never intervene, we will not do this, we will not allow Ukraine this, never saying if Russia does this, then we do this. Ukraine does it. South Korea does it. South Korea says if the Russians do extend their aid for North Korea, then we will extend our aid for Ukraine, thus creating a direct deterrence with believable consequences, with reasonable consequences, and thus an attempt to shape Russia's behavior here, showing the West how the West should have probably done it from the beginning. And finally, the report is that the US have given Ukraine a prototype for a new self-propelled howitzer. What we see here is clearly a Humvee chassis, and it carries a 105 millimeter howitzer that can be easily and rapidly deployed and then continue advancing, retreating, redeploying very fast. And it's now in Ukraine, or it's being given to Ukraine for testing. And as Humvees are currently being taken out of commission in the US, they are being replaced by the JLTV, I think is the name. They should be available in bigger numbers, so maybe we see some bigger developments here in the future. But that was it from me already for today. So if you enjoyed today's situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments and the attacks in Russia and the casualties on the Crimean Peninsula? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description, or a super like or super thanks. But thank you to everyone already supporting this channel. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.